Thank you so much for participating to SCRIBO. This is our second seminar, and SCRIBO is a series of seminars dedicated purely to ancient writing systems, especially those that are still undeciphered. And it is my great pleasure and delight and honor to present Judith Weingarten, who needs no introduction because she's far too famous. And if you're here, it's because you know who she is. She is, well, as you know, an expert in Bronze Age glyptic art, especially the economic implications for social, economic, and political relationships. She's also very much interested more broadly in the cultural interactions between the Aegean and the Mediterranean, mainly Egypt. And she's also a big lover of cats. And today she's going to be merging two great interests of her, the felines and Cretan hieroglyphic, and their connections. Before I leave the scene to her, I would like to say that our next guest is going to be Massimo Cultraro, who will be presenting on Embriologia del segno, Angelo Mosso il metodo della fisiologia clinica applicato alle scritture del Mediterraneo antico. The seminar will be in Italian, and it's going to take place on the 3rd of June at the same time on the same platform, with a new link that will be posted tomorrow. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Judith Weingarten, and let's see what happens to the Cretan cat. Thank you so much. Judith, over to you.
Here we go. Oh, right, that's it.
Oh, from beginning, yes.
Okay, here we go. This talk is going to be divided into two parts. The first part is specifically on Cretan hieroglyphics. The first part is based on a paper that Sylvia and I presented at the South-Southeast Crete conference in 2017, which has not yet been published, and that we thought was a reason to represent some of the main ideas from that paper here today. And after that, which should take about 20 minutes, we're going to have, I suggest, a short break where we can discuss some of the points that have come up, questions, and see where we're, if it's generally accepted. And then I want to merge it, in a sense, with part of a paper I wrote for non-scribal communication media in the Bronze Age, which was published in 2017. And finally, to discuss together, bring up for discussion, some points which look interesting from the merger of these two papers. So let's get started. The first script to appear is the so-called Archani script, though it's uncertain if it actually appeared late in the pre-palatial period or was contemporary with the foundation of the first palace at Knossos. The evidence for the script is limited to seals, usually made of bone, for there are no extant clay documents from this time. The script is almost entirely repetitive in that the seals repeat the same 5 signs as you see in the 3rd row, and that these are conventionally, if I can find, yes, transcribed as Asa Sarami, which most scholars tend still to see as the hieroglyphic predecessor of the so-called libation formula of later Linear A. Some of these seals also depict single images of animals or humans, as you see, for example, in the top row, or geometric designs. And here, for example, we also find the, try not to jump slides, the hand, leg, and sistrum, signs which will be incorporated into the developed hieroglyphic script. At the end of Middle Minoan 2b, or in some places possibly later, we find relatively rich deposits with clay documents written in Cretan hieroglyphics, as well as seal impressions with the hieroglyphic signs at Mali at Cartier-Mu, the hieroglyphic deposit at Knossos, and at Petros in the east. And of course, we find hieroglyphic inscribed seals scattered throughout eastern Crete, with occasional outliers elsewhere. There are three main seal shapes: the pet shaft, which is in dead center, the three-sided prism, and the four-sided prism. The pet shaft is really the best designed for stamping and making seal impressions, especially on clay, because it's easy to hold by a handle and stamp and then lift it out cleanly. It does seem designed, in fact, for a career of palatial administration. With that as a very quick background, what can we say about the hieroglyphic script itself? Reading and interpreting Cretan hieroglyphics is obviously problematic, a difficulty faced across the board in all early writing systems, whether Egyptian, cuneiform, Chinese, Mayan, whatever. But the Cretan situation is extra complicated because of the difficulty of distinguishing between signs for words, logograms, and signs for sounds, phonograms. This is especially true when we try to read the seals, and read, of course, is within quotation marks. In fact, the signs engraved specifically on the seals were long considered not to be true writing. True writing was recorded only on administrative clay documents, such as those inscribed on clay bars and medallions, etc., while the symbols on the seals were demoted to what was called, with a little bit of a sneer, ornamental writing. This distinction was based on two main points. First, several sign sequences were found only on seals and not ever on the archival clay documents. And second, many such sequences were so often repeated in the seal corpus that they came to be defined as formulas. This is where the problems begin. The Catalogue of Cretan Hieroglyphic Inscriptions, published in 1996, popularly known as Chic, chose to disregard all the signs that disrupt the harmony of the formulas, dismissing them as insignificant and omitting them from the transcriptions, or placing them within parentheses, another way of saying dubious, do not read. Here's a good example. One of the most frequent of formulas is the combination of two signs, one shaped like the human eye, the other seemingly an instrument or tool conventionally called a trowel. As you will notice, on some seals, other symbols are added, such as, whoops, a very sensitive, the double axe, or an animal head. Here's a cat head, here's a bovine head, and so forth. And there are many of these sort of interpolated images. These signs allegedly operate according to no and pirouette about, changing their positions and order in ways which, for the authors of Chic, are not phonetic. The trowel eye is just one example, but such omissions are applied throughout the corpus, signs that should be recognized in the repertory being struck out. Now a counter reaction has set in. In 2009, Anna Margarita Jassink published Cretan Hieroglyphic Seals, a new classification of symbols and ornamental filling motifs. This rehabilitated a number of signs and symbols that had not been included in Chic. In part, she was following Arthur Evans, who had originally included many of these signs in his Scripta Manoa, such as the full-bodied cat or cat mask, and various other animals and designs. Her approach stimulated a number of younger scholars to reopen this and many of the other questions pertaining to the hieroglyphic script, particularly as it appears on seal stones. Discussion also revived about another aspect of hieroglyphic seals, that is the occurrence of single signs on seals, such as those on this slide. Such isolated signs date back, as we've seen, to the bone seals of the Achani script. Oddly enough, Many of these same signs are recognized as part of the Cretan hieroglyphic script when they are not isolated. But when they stand alone, they fall outside the conventional definition of an inscription, which is at least two consecutive signs aligned together in coherent succession. And therefore, they too were banished from Sheikh. However, if we look at them closely, we notice features which nonetheless point to the images representing, in all likelihood, some form of language notation. The small crosses scattered across the faces of some seals are defined as stictograms. See this here. That is a kind of punctuation, normally understood to indicate reading direction, and the same function as we have also on the clay documents. And this is said to apply as well when stictograms appear on hieroglyphic seals. Is this really the case? How can it possibly give a reading direction for a single sign, which has no direction to be read? In such cases, it must have a different purpose. Still another explanation is needed when the cross stictogram is doubled or even tripled, as happens on some seal faces. And here's a doubling, and here's two on either side. You can't read simultaneously from two directions. We suggest that the explanation must lie on the fluid boundaries between icons and images. So the question is, when does an image become a sign? In order to distinguish what is iconic and what is writing stricto sensu, we suggest that the Minoans applied a conventional cross to underline, as it were, that the symbol is not a picture, but a sign. In other words, the stictogram can indicate on seals the way that the symbols are to be understood. If this is the right way to view these single sign seals, we clearly need to develop a new methodology for understanding the script on seals, and from the bottom up. One moment. It's tea time in Amsterdam. The new methodology we propose entails considering every single element that is engraved on the seal face, not disregarding or ignoring or dismissing any mark that meets the eye. We argue that the Minoan engravers made every single mark on the seal for some reason, and that this reason might be to record specific linguistic or administrative features. If patterns emerge, as we think they do, it is our job to try to understand them rather than to neglect or understate them. So let's have another look now at some of the common formulas, beginning again with the trowel and eye, but now viewed through a more holistic filter. We see that the cross stictogram is at times repeated, and that marks such as small dots, so let's just look here, the repeating of the cross stictogram, and marks such as small dots are interspersed with the signs, accentuating some as if singling them out. The effect is often one of separation of elements rather than of unity. The trowel sign appears particularly emphasized, as if it were an entity on its own and not meant as the initial sign in a two-sign text. We'll be looking at some of these where we have quite a lot of signs separating the trowel from the eye, or here, as you see, completely removed from. A good example of how this works is from Myrtos-Pyrgos on a jasper prism that Gerald Cadogan, Sylvia, and I published in SMEA in 2012 in our first attempt to apply a holistic understanding of hieroglyphic glyptic. Here, the trowel and the eye is not only separated by a cat sign, but the trowel is cartouched, as it were, by S spirals, while the eye is encapsulated by so-called fillers, which act to stress, we believe, the separation of the signs. And this is true whether or not the cat has phonetic meaning. We'll come back to the seal a little later because there are two more formulas on it which might indicate it has a specific function. What we'd like to stress now is what we call visual tinkering with the so-called trowel eye formula. And this is really very common. By tinkering, we mean that it is never laid out plainly on the seal face. Here are some figures that Sylvia has published in Cadmos. The top line, aligned by itself in proper linear form, none. And then in decorative supplementary elements in initial position, etc., etc., etc. But the point is, we never really have an unmolested trowel eye formula on seals. And very much the same thing happens when we have a look at the trowel arrow formula, which is the most common of all the formulas on hieroglyphic seals. There is almost always something setting signs apart. This may be signs placed between the trowel and arrow, as in a case like this, or stictograms, which on the first one we have loads of stictograms, or signs rotated or cartouched, and this is very common where you get, they're not in the same orientation at all. And here are the numbers for trowel arrow. Just 3 examples have the signs in supposedly readable linear form. All the others are tinkered. In short, the Minoan engravers almost always tinkered with the trowel. Either adding an iconographic symbol that might look to us like decoration at the beginning or in between, or they rotated it, or they wrapped it up in a cartouche of decorative fillers, or they put in a cross dictogram, which might be duplicated or triplicated. So what is going on? Surely something is telling us to look at the trowel sign more closely, in a more systematic way, to capture rather than dismiss the richness of the glyptic message. For that's the only way we believe to discover what it was used for and ultimately what it meant. And what we actually see in almost all cases is that the trowel sign is formally emphasized, if not virtually separated or isolated. There is, in other words, a deliberate attempt to make it stand out as a singular feature. And this, despite the trowel being so frequently found on seals, it is nearly always accompanied by only one of 2 other signs, either the eye or the arrow, nobody else. Are we still sure that these are formulas? Probably not. Rather, trowel eye and trowel arrow ought to be decoupled and deconstructed. And that means, if we are correct, that what we have here is probably logographic writing, not syllables. To verify this, Sylvia extended her analysis to all the so-called formulaic patterns that we find on seals to see if such readings could be and could be extended. There are half a dozen more such formulas, and here they are in descending order of frequency. We'll begin our further analysis with the 3rd most common formula, the famous gait and leg, usually, but not always, accompanied by a 3-branch plan. Arthur Evans interpreted this formula as a mark of princely status. The leg was that of a leader, and the gait the sign of a guardian. Rather more soberly, this is what we found when we started running the numbers. Clearly, the gate leg formula normally behaves in a more linear manner. That is, a sequence of signs to be read consecutively, rather than as single signs meant to be isolated from each other. Compared to trowel I and trowel arrow, it does look quite literally straightforward, as if meant to be read. Let's now return to the seal from Myrtos-Pyrgos, which we looked at earlier. Besides the trowel I, which I hope you look at now quite differently than you did a few minutes ago, the seal has two more identified formulas. We have the gate, leg, and three-branch plant here, and we have, which I will call anyway, for convenience, just the gate formula. And it has another formula, the fourth most common, and that is the template formula with what is called the pronged instrument, and the same, usually but not always, ending with a three-branch plant. Obviously, both the gate and template formulas have a lot more activity on their seal faces than just the dry cells. And this we have analyzed in the 2012 paper with Gerald Cadogan. What I'd like to stress today, however, is that the template formula is almost always partnered with the gate formula. Altogether, there are 16 seals with the template formula, and 13 of them share the seal with the gate formula. In other words, the great majority of seals with the template formula must work somehow, in some sense, with the gate formula. The opposite, however, is not true. The gate formula frequently appears on its own and does not have the template formula with it. So it seems reasonable to hypothesize that the function of the template formula all but requires the additional presence of the gate formula. Whatever job or rank the template represents, it needs additional support from the gate formula, but not the other way round. What can we surmise is that what we can surmise is that the two sequences often work in combination, and that together with trowel I or trowel arrow, they create a hierarchy of functions. But the big question, of course, towards which we are working is, to what extent is Cretan hieroglyphic on the seals involved in language notation? Despite the presence of highly iconic symbols, such as the trowel sign, there is no reason to assume that the hieroglyphics on the seals are not already at the stage of language recording. And here's one irresistible example. A sign on the seal that was mysteriously expunged from the repertory of signs in the corpus not only should now be reinstated in its own right, but it can also give us an avenue into explaining what category it might represent, and that is the cat sign. We can be certain that this sign on the seal is a phonogram, which has a long life throughout the Aegean tradition of scripts, ending up as our deciphered Ma sign of linear B, where it is also used as the wool ideogram, having passed from hieroglyphics to linear A to linear B. Its genealogy can be reconstructed diachronically and phonologically. And there's every reason to believe that Ma or Mao was exactly what a Minoan cat would say. Onomatopoeia at work, perhaps. And so I end this part of my talk with one of the most beautiful seals in Minoan glyptic, the famous carnelian cat seal. This three-sided prism contains both the template formula, as we see here, and the gate formula, the latter with the cat plump in the middle, and the gate conveniently rotated so that it makes a platform on which the cat is actually sitting, but it's still the gait, leg. Sorry, whoops, back. The gate, leg, and three branch plant. And I would like to wager, and I will wager in the second part of the paper, that the cat is already saying meow, and that it could already be an ideogram connected with Cretan wool. So let's stop here for a few minutes for questions or clarifications, and then I'd like to give a short postscript about a peculiar and unexpected use of the cat sign in linear A. So I will unshare the screen. Sylvia, come.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. I'm sure that there are loads of questions, and I don't think I should be the first one to ask one, because in a way you're preaching to the converted here, at least when it comes to me. But maybe I should break the ice, actually. I've been thinking that perhaps the full-bodied cat and the cat mask may not mean the same thing. Have you considered the option that two different things are being meant by showing a full-bodied feline as opposed to just a cat face?
Certainly, there's a possibility. I suspect not. I think it's rather, it may be partly a local habit, and it may be partly a difference in the time as we further develop the script, that they're using the mask, cat mask, pars per toto, which is what I really think is happening. I don't see a difference, but we'll have a look at that on the next part.
Yeah, the pars pro toto strategy happens in Maya many times. We see it in the Rongo script too. It's something that seems to follow a trail, a common trail in newly created writing systems.
Yeah, as they begin to become, in some sense, more abstract or more linear, whatever, then they go away from the purely iconic form, which would be the full-bodied cat, unless they are pushing it forward for, I think, like on that carnelian, which is quite a late seal, I would imagine, although it has no provenance. It's being used in a very explicit, very strong way, and it's an emphatic way, although I don't think that's a linguistic case.
Differentiation, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't find it particularly surprising that if you're right, what gets to be transferred onto linear A and eventually linear B with the AB80 sign is actually the cat mask, and that follows your argumentation with stylization and the pars pro toto paradigm. I wanted to also ask you, and then I'll leave the floor to whoever else wants to ask questions. Do you think the probability of onomatopoeia playing out can be extended to other signs? And how would you go about gauging the actual sound values on the basis of, because Ma is sort of an international feline language when it comes to onomatopoeia. Most languages, ancient languages too, have something correlated to ma, mao, ma, meow, through onomatopoeia and the connection with cats. But how would you go about gauging onomatopoeia on?
Well, I think the first way, and John Younger has already taken a couple of steps in that direction when he's looking at the linear B values and guessing them back through linear A, even to hieroglyphic, but more linear A, is obviously a bullhead is going to make a sound that's sort of like a B sound. And this seems to be in a lot of languages. And so he has already put together a few which are possible. And I would certainly start from there and try moving on precisely with the ones, a little bit as happened with ancient Greek in the discussion of how things were pronounced, using the animal sounds in Aristophanes. And so in just some things could be said and some things couldn't be said by different animals. So you have already certain constraints that are, if not universal, they're awfully close to it.
Yes, cognitive linguists are very keen on seeing this linguistic iconicity with onomatopoeia playing out more frequently than usually thought, which is a very interesting avenue to pursue, actually. I have other questions, but maybe at the end, and I would like to ask anybody to sort of let us know whether they want to ask anything to Judith. Unmuting themselves.
Yes, start unmuting, yeah. Well, if not, either your question or we'll go on to the second part, which might open another can of worms.
Can I ask my question and then leave it to you? The double axe, I noticed that you showed face D of the Myrtos-Pyrgos seal that we published. The double axe is always at the beginning. It's always signposted at the beginning. And more often than not, it's sort of isolated as well. It's marked as by way of fillers as a self-standing entity, in the same way that we think the trowel was signposted and isolated and separated from the rest of whatever was engraved. What do you think about that? What is that doing?
Well, I think we're going to see, as we go through the analyses of each and every one of these seals, that there are going to be a number of signs which are regularly, if not always, isolated. And that those will be probably our logograms. And some will be able to trace through later scripts, and some will have died out. I mean, but that is one of the obvious, I think, next steps, Sylvia.
Yes. I'm sure Matilde, who's listening to us, Matilde Civitilo, will ask a question about this. I see that there's a question from Dennis to everyone. Was the cat used in other artistic expressions, or was it limited to the seals?
That's a very good question. Certainly in late Minoan iconography, we do have cats. They're never frequent, given the fact that the island must have been half overrun with felines. It's surprisingly rare. And perhaps because it was kept as a script sign, I have really no way of explaining this. Because when you look at the hierarchy of animals pictured in the linear A period, there are, except, as we'll see in a few cases, the cat mask, it's very, very uncommon. It really appears primarily in script and a few frescoes. Yes,
somebody mentions and a late Minoan one wall painting, Target Triada.
Triada? It's, I think, later than that, but it doesn't matter. But it's definitely the it's there, and it's a beautiful cat. And there are some cats, and they are, but mostly they're even, you know, they're on seals. We have a couple of cats hunting birds, which have obviously. It's what cats do, but it's not at all common, and yet it must have been something seen, if not every day, almost every day in Minoan Crete. So it's an interesting blank, in a sense, not 100%, but relatively blank.
And Luca Girella, hello Luca, says cats also appear at Malia MM2B applique on vessels.
Yeah, quite right, yes.
Great.
Okay, shall we go on to this next set?
If nobody else wants to ask a question, we can proceed, Judith.
I will get back to here and we'll move on.
Brilliant.
One of them works. Okay. We now skip to the time after about 1700 BCE, when the linear A script began to be used across the island. Cretan hieroglyphics has disappeared, and with it has gone the concept of script on seals. Those are two things that archaeologists have never really come to grips with. The change from Cretan hieroglyphics to linear A, and the disappearance of script on seals, but that is another subject. All written documents, whenever they appear, are now written in linear A. In addition to tablets, there is a rich variety of sealed clay documents, including the Minoan rondel, which you see at the upper left, a sealed document unique to Minoan culture. Roundels are flattened clay discs with usually a very brief linear A inscription on one or both sides and one or more seal impressions on the rim. And here you see on this rondel the sign for the tripod, probably marking a tripod of bronze, and around the rim, if I can find my, you see 1, 2, 3, 4 seal impressions, and they actually do go around further. The roundel is coeval with linear A administration. They appear along with the script in Middle Minoan 2b and vanish after the late Minoan 1b destructions. Rondels are generally interpreted as receipts for commodities, the recipient of goods acknowledging units of debt by marking the rim of the rondel with the equivalent number of seal impressions, thereby accepting responsibility for removing that number of units from the palatial or villa storeroom. Or, on the contrary, as I have recently argued, it might be rather marking the entry of those goods into the storerooms. Most of the roughly 182 published roundels are stamped by a single seal type once or repeatedly, with the number of impressions varying from 1 to 15. Here's a close-up of a seal impression from a rondel, just 2 facing bullheads, and this is what the rim looks like, where that seal has impressed here 4 or 5 times that you can see. And this is what it looks like when it's multiply stamped by the same seal. What I want to discuss today are 2 seals that stamped rondels at late Minoan 1b Chania in Western Crete. Both seal owners were specialists. Their extant rondels shows them dealing in a single type of cloth, which is now blocked, I think, by my head, but it is the rare ideogram AB164. And on the right, you see in this a soft stone lentoid impression depicting a butterfly, which had stamped 8 surviving rondels, 1 to 5 times each, all marked with the ideogram 164. And on the left, there is the impression of a soft stone amygdaloid of slightly irregular shape with the image of a flying bird, and in front of the bird, an enigmatic cone-shaped object with protruding horns. This seal owner stamped 4 or possibly 5 rondels, 3 fully preserved with 3 to 5 seal impressions each, and a fragment with at least 2 impressions, all inscribed by the same ideogram 164. Because the ideogram survives into linear B, we can glean some information from a later record at Knossos. And that record on the upper right reads roughly, at these 3 villages, 54 units of lana, which is wool, were made into or woven for 9 cloths of 164 type. 1 Mycenaean unit of wool weighed approximately 3 kilos. So it obviously required 6 units of 18 kilos of wool to produce 1 unit of 164. Assuming the proportions remained the same, the late Minoan 1 owner of the butterfly seal and the owner of the bird seal would have needed some 250 to 300 kilos of wool to make 30 pieces of cloth marked on their roundels. Now, the same butterfly seal had also stamped 8 hanging clay nodules, each of which was inscribed with a single linear A sign. 2 were marked A301 and 6 AB74. This is the only seal owner at Chania who stamp documents inscribed with these particular signs. We have no information on the meaning of the signs, not even whether they were used as logograms or abbreviations. However, the same combination of 301 and 74 is very well known from late Minoan 1b Iatriada. At Iatriada, about 70% of the more than 1,000 stamped clay nodules were inscribed, most commonly with one of 6 linear A signs, which cluster into just 2 groups. It is the second group there, group 2, that uses these same 2 signs, 301 and 74, and the seals that stamped the nodules inscribed with those signs were totally dedicated to this group. So the procedure looks exactly the same as at Chania. It seems that members of group 2 work with just 2 signs or 2 products or in 2 specialist storerooms. And now at Chania, we have an added link through the butterfly seal, who stamped nodules marked 301 and other nodules 74, but was also exclusively involved with 164 cloth on his rondels. Naturally, one wonders if signs 301 and 74 were also connected with textiles in some manner. The evidence is quite indirect, but surprising nonetheless. The butterfly seal and the bird seal, as we have seen, exclusively handle the same cloth product 164 on rondels. It may be no more than coincidence that well over half of the group 2 nodules of Iatriada, 133 of 238 nodules, also happened to be stamped by a seal with the image of a flying bird. But what cannot be coincidence is the enigmatic conical object floating before the Chania bird, which strongly resembles the linear A sign AB80, already mentioned by Sylvia. AB80 is also the linear A wool logogram, as we think it was in Cretan hieroglyphics, and will be again in linear B, hence our certainty. In short, this seal owner put the sign of his trade on his seal. He deals in wool or woolen goods. So we can be reasonably sure that the seal owner was dealing with wool, some of which at least would be turned into 164 cloth, a trademark on a Minoan seal. Summing up, looking back at the Middle Bronze Age and the Cretan hieroglyphic script, we look again at these 2 seals, a 4-sided prism and a 3-sided prism. They not only share the cat, but they also share at least 2 formulas. What we have on the Myrtos-Pyrgos seal, we have, remember, the gate formula and the template formula. And of course, we have now the deconstructed trowel I with the cat in the middle. We have virtually the same thing on the carnelian seal. We have the gate, the leg formula, the gate leg formula, and we have over here the template formula. We might even have, if we're correct in deconstructing a trowel here, and then this sign would probably apply here, but that we don't know, obviously. But what we have, if we stay on the right slide, which is really, really interesting, the carnelian seal is 3-sided, but the Myrtos-Pyrgos seal is 4-sided, so we have a whole extra side of information. And there, that usually we find there are signs that don't fit any other known groups and so forth, and it's been speculated that there may be, these could be individual names or the names of villages or toponyms of some sort. But what we've got on this one is really sort of exciting, if we could stick to it, and that is we have the sign teller, the sign for cloth. So what I think we've got on the Myrtos-Pyrgos is both the cat sign for wool, and remember, as far as impressions go from these seals, they're almost always single impressions. They don't go 1, 2, 3, 4 or 1, 2, 3. You get a single face of in most cases. A couple of cases, it might be 2, but that can never be certain. But what we have on the seal is wool in the top of this seal, the first side, and on the bottom, we have tela, cloth. So this seal is telling us, we think, as clearly as possible, very much what this seal is telling us, but now partly in script. We've got the wool sign with the displayed bird, and the cloth sign is inscribed on the side of the rondels. Well, I think it's fair to say that with all of this, we have let the cat definitely out of the bag. We'll see what everyone has to say about that. What this brings up in my mind also is one of the larger questions of how much can we learn from this indication of how the wool and textile industry is being organized in the Linear A period, which it seems to be on almost entirely rondels and seals, if we're right about the 2 signs, 301 and 74. There are mentions of both products on tablets, but they mentions of few, very few, and quantities are very small. There is nothing whatsoever resembling the huge quantities that we find on the Linear B tablets, where both wool and sheep and textiles are clearly being centrally controlled by the Palace of Knossos. And I think this is one more piece of evidence that in some way the Linear A system is much more decentralized for these vital products. So we have a real...
Yes.
Okay, I think that's all I have to say today. So let me unshare again. Stop share. If we need a picture, we can always come back to it. That's it, Sylvia.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you so much. This was very tantalizing to let the cat out of the bag in this way. I think you really brought the argument that we had developed 2 years ago now further, much further.
Yeah.
And the implications for the organization of the textile production on Minoan Crete, very as tantalizing as your title, in fact. Can I just ask you a tiny question, and then I promise I will shut up and leave the questions to other people. The Myrtos-Pyrgos seal, back again on that one. You seem to imply that on face A, we really have the logogram for wool there, a resounding logogram for wool, as much as we have the tela on face D, and that the correlation is that this is what the seal was used for, textile production. Question is, to what extent can we surmise anything that would point in the direction of Myrtos-Pyrgos being involved in that from an archaeological perspective?
The site of Myrtos-Pyrgos.
Yes.
Cracky, you have to ask Gerald Cadogan.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know what has been found there, except of course for the rondel that John Younger and Paul Rehak found outside of the destroyed villa some years ago, but that we had the idea that that might be for gold, if you remember when we saw it. But I honestly don't know the answer to that. I would not make the assumption that the Myrtos-Pyrgos seal that we found was used at Myrtos-Pyrgos. It could have been lost there, carried there, for reasons that we simply don't know. It's not found in any clear context, and it's not, as far as I know, there was nothing around it that would indicate function, or even function at Myrtos-Pyrgos.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. But what I would go further than this is to say, I think we really have to now look again at all of these iconic signs, thoroughly, seal by seal, face by face. and see if we can take this argument further, because it may be all sorts of interesting just to go this far, but if we can't extend it to more of the formulas and more of the seals, it's not going to be tremendously helpful, I
Yes. I mean, the big question here is to what extent can we recognize categories such as logograms as opposed to phonograms within the same seal when the decoration and the ornamental features are so prominent? And to what extent can we actually revisit what we think are ornamental features in a different way that may be indicative of language notation? And this is like a big thing that probably we'll need to discuss for years to come.
I think so, because of course, now we're paying for the fact that she did not put all of these things into the volume. And so the only way is to go back and start, rebuilding that file ourselves, which is a big job. Yeah.
Yes, but big question, and the problem still hangs, looms large on our heads. I'm not really sure how we should tackle it, to be honest.
That's the problem. And I do think, to put that together with what you said earlier, would be also to look at those signs which possibly are onomatopoeic, and then where we can start to see if there's anything that we can get from the Linear B tablets that would be helpful in this, and if there is a chance that they are descending from Linear A, as is the wool sign and the Ma sign.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Any question from anyone?
If you haven't Zoomed before, I only just discovered this myself a few days ago. You use the chat function to ask questions, and I see there's number 5 on chat. Sylvia, could you check that and see if some people have asked questions?
I have checked. I don't see any new ones.
Oh, okay.
No, I have no notification of any new ones.
Hi, Judith. I'm Barbara. If it's
Yes.
okay for you, I would prefer to ask you a question directly because it takes time to write, to type on the chat. So if it's okay for you, I'd like to ask you. You in the first part of your presentation, you have convincingly shown as different elements in the so-called formulas are often separated through fillers or other smaller motifs, and single signs are emphasized on seals, no?
Yep.
Have you already considered the possibilities that these signs are not logograms but rather abbreviations, so that they would have contemporaneously maintained their phonetic nature, the phonetic value, but as an abbreviations for a whole word, so that they are not exactly logograms, but they can work in a similar way.
I think, Barbara, you're thinking particularly about the Ma sign as being possibly the ancestor of Malos, the
yes, and this is this is linked to the second part of your presentation, where you talked about the Ma sign as standing for the as a logogram for wool, but in fact it is the logogram. Both Linear A and Linear B use a monogram, which is the combination of two phonograms, which are Ma and Ru, so sign 80 and 26, if you want to avoid phonetic values. So it might work, this hypothesis, no?
And this is indeed very possible that Maru is spelling it out. There is, of course, a possibility that Maru is a specific type of wool, which is why I wouldn't jump to embrace this idea, but it certainly is a real possibility that it is an abbreviation, and that Maru is the ancestor of Malos. That I leave to you people. I'm just a seal person.
Because in in principle, I find more likely that for the users of phonetic logographic script, I hardly imagine that people who are familiar with the logographic script should distinguish the logograms. By contrast, I think it's possible that they felt the need to distinguish two phonograms where they were not used in combination for spelling out a word, but as abbreviations for two different words. This is a possibility, of course. It's just food for thinking.
Yeah. Right.
But can I ask a question to Barbara? How would you go about ascertaining that methodologically?
No, yes, no, this is something I'm thinking about. So I don't have the answer as for methodology, but this would work with also with the second part of Judith's presentation today, where she showed the syllabogram 80 used alone, maybe in order to indicate the wall, which is commonly pointed out or indicated by the two signs 80 and 26, both in linear A and linear B, I mean.
Judith, would you like?
The idea of the single ma could be an abbreviation. But, yeah.
Sure, because yeah,
it could be.
I just can't think of how we could distinguish it with the documents we have. But as you say, it's something to think about and to keep in mind as we pursue the rest of the glyptic evidence.
And in that pursuit, we have Matilda Civitillo asking, speaking about onomatopoeia, what about AB23 mu used hydrographically as boss idiom?
Yeah, mu. I think that's one of the ones that John Younger likes very much as a possibility. Yes, yeah. I mean, cows do sort of say moo.
Yeah.
and there are a number of these, and I think, you know, we haven't picked them up to use them as the starting point for understanding primarily linear A, to start putting those values in where we can see it and moving them back where appropriate, which goes to hieroglyphics in the case of mu, that, you know, slowly but surely we'll come up with more information on what these documents really are, even if we never can decipher them.
Okay. You'll need to let the cow out of the cow cage. With it.
Yeah, we have here a comment from Stefania on she can confirm that there are textiles tools found at Myrtos-Pyrgos. So
okay, great.
So that there must have been, well, there certainly would have been working of textiles in the villa. I mean, it would be inconceivable if it weren't. But whether they had a textile industry, Stefania, is it sufficient for you to go that far?
Well, it would be interesting to see to what extent we can push this agenda of decentralization, as you seem to suggest, which you also suggest in your article, well, in your chapter in our edited book, 1 = 1, when 1 = 1.
Yeah.
So,
sorry,
can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. But sorry, how do you? Where do you see that in that chapter?
Oh, at the end, when you talk about how the ma sign in linear A is not that common, it's not that frequent.
Right. I'm sorry. I'm saying yes. Yeah, this is really one of the larger questions that interests me from the administrative side. That what was going on in the wool industry in the Middle Bronze Age and in the earlier later Bronze Age, before the Mycenaeans, because to me it's inconceivable that there was not a major wool and textile industry on Crete at this time. But reading the tablets, you would have no idea that it was any more than a household industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that's possible, because it's one of the things that surely was the backbone of the palatial economy, given the failure of finding practically anything else. And it's the same as in that article with the metal trade.
The metals, yes.
Industry. There's very, very little on the linear A tablets that referred to the metal trade.
Mm-hmm.
And now that must have been the other major industry of the time. And that was that provided the wealth to build the palaces and keep them running. So I think we have a major difference between the hieroglyphic stroke linear A administrative system and the linear B Mycenaean system, which is quite clearly centralized and major. We have, Georgia.
Oh, Georgia. Hello, Georgia.
Hello.
Textile industry was practiced even at smaller settlements. We have different sorts of loom weights at Apesokari, for example. Hi, guys. Hello, Georgia.
Hello. Hi.
Yes.
Yeah, but maybe that, you know, if it's a, well, that wouldn't tell you if it's centralized or decentralized administratively, because it would be a home worker kind of industry in many cases anyway. But certainly, that's very important to understand how widespread it is.
There is a question from Andrea Santamaria. Is there any proposal to understand the other alleged decorative motives, e.g. the possible sun star and the 046 on the Lassithi three-sided prism?
In a word, no, I don't think so. I have not been able to find it, but I haven't finished the study obviously yet. But I think some of the signs are just will be basic signs that any script will use, and it will not necessarily lead us in a specific direction. I think we shouldn't get wildly over optimistic that all of them are going to fall into place in the next few years. I doubt that, unless we get an awful lot more material. But I mean, all of them are up for grabs. They all need to be studied. So, it's not my possession. It's got to be studied by anyone who's interested in these questions. And the sun sign might lead to something if one gathers them all together and looks them as I think, from the way Sylvia and I have been trying to do it, from what we call the holistic filter or focus. So we're looking at the entire seal or seal impression as we have it, and integrate as far as we can our knowledge of how the glyptic engravers are indicating some of these signs are independent and some of them are not. And so, open field day.
Yeah, I must say, not just us, Judith, not just you and I, but also Matilde Civitilo, who's listening, and Roland de Court and Anna Margherita Jasing.
Yes,
they've all worked towards establishing whatever it is that we need to do to look at these signs and symbols and icons in the right way.
Absolutely. Matilda, what are you working on now? What are you working on now?
Okay, I am mute. Okay, sorry. Now, in this moment, I'm studying the relationships between the differences between textualization on seals and on clay documents. It is completely different. Obviously, the manipulation of the written signs and general rules governing the passage from cultural and linguistic content to written text on seals and on clay documents. And I think it's because the ideological contents attached to this special object and the social practices in which they are put in. And I think regarding Cat Mask, I have hypothesized that it was used like an icon or an emblem, meaning that whoever approached this sign did it possibly without actually reading it, but recognized and understood its meaning as a whole. But it could be definitely an abbreviation, because we know about the use of abbreviations on seals, for example, by the schemes, some scheme like badge acronymic that Jean-Pierre Olivier found on some seals. For example, we have some 3-sided or 4-sided prisms with a word beginning with a sign that is repeated on the other faces with the formula, together with the formula. So it is, I think, possibly that it is the abbreviation of the word appearing on one face, repeated on the other faces. So it is entirely possible that we have abbreviations on seals, and we could have also determinatives. But
we haven't even discussed, yes.
Yeah, but if we hypothesize that the determinatives could be written in any relative position to the word to which they refer to, they are referring to. For example, cat mask could be at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. So it is like the sign alternates by changing its position in a way, in ways that do not appear really phonetic.
No, and that it's quite correct that these need not be, but I think that cat, the full-bodied cat, and those 2 seals, the carnelian and the Myrtos-Pyrgos, are in very different positions and different on the seals, but the provenance of it and the statement of it is clearly, I would agree with you, it's not phonetic in those cases, but it is a statement, I believe, of the wool trade. It's simply a trademark.
Okay. Yeah,
like the M for McDonald's.
For McDonald's, right? Mac. We don't have a sign for Mac yet.
Karen, and the development of the sign, hieroglyph, Cretan hieroglyphs, linear A and linear B, it is very significant. The pattern is, we begin from, I don't know, an abbreviation or an icon or an emblem, something like that. We have a syllabogram phonetic sign in linear A, in linear B, a phonetic sign, and the ideogram for wool, used separately, because it is possible, I guess, that Mycenaeans, linear B, took the ideogram for wool like an ideogram without understanding the ligature, the linear A ligature, maru or maro, just like an ideogram.
Yeah.
So this is the circle.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Judith. Thank you very much. It is very interesting what you are doing. Very stimulating.
Who's speaking? I can't tell.
So, it's always Matilda.
That was me.
Sorry. Okay, because it lost the
my face. Yeah.
Your words and your movement. So
okay.
Yeah. This is, I mean, I think, by the way, Sylvia, this is a tremendous initiative, getting us all up here on Zoom.
Thank you. Despite all technical difficulties.
Well, it's
not easy.
The first time I'm doing it for an academic subject, so there are technical difficulties. But I mean, it's really amazing to think of it the way, and the number of countries represented just on this.
Indeed, I was looking at the participants, and I was very happy to see such a broad spectrum of different.
It's hard to do it even at a conference. Well, nowadays, it's impossible.
I was also struck by the stark difference between your background and my background. I think at one point you could see my clothes hanging, which is one of the sort of the mishaps of having to do this virtually on an online platform. Okay, any more questions? No questions?
No.
Okay. In that case, all I'm going to do is say thank you so much, Judith, for this wonderful presentation.
Well,
and we're waiting for many more animals to come out of the cages as we come out of our cages at the end of this pandemic, hopefully the end of this pandemic. Thank you so much to everybody that participated, and
thank you, everyone. Thank you.
We will see you in 2 weeks' time. 3rd of June with Massimo Cultraro. Thank you so much, everyone.
Look forward to the invitation. Bye, all.
Bye bye.
Bye bye, Sylvia. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Judith.
Colin, Bobby, Karen.
Bye, Judith. We really enjoyed it. Sorry I was late.
No, you weren't very late. And Bobby was there at the beginning.
Thank you, Judith. It was wonderful. It was great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Judith. It was terrific.